Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this joint session of the Government Operations Committee and the Planning and Housing and Economic Development Committee, also known as PHED. Today we have one item, and this is Bill 5-21, Agricultural Land Preservation, Solar Collection Systems, Dedication of Business Personal Property Tax Revenue. This particular bill was sponsored by lead sponsor Councilmember Friedson and co-sponsored by Councilmembers Rice and Katz, and it was introduced January 19th, 2021. We did have a public hearing, which was held on March 9th, 2021. This bill would dedicate business personal property tax revenue received for a solar collection system constructed in the agricultural reserve zone for the Agricultural Land Preservation Fund. The bill would define a solar collection system as an arrangement of panels or other solar devices that provides for the collection, inversion, storage, and distribution of solar energy for electricity generation, space heating, space cooling, or water heating. A solar collection system includes freestanding or mounted devices. The Agricultural Land Preservation Fund is an existing special non-lapsing revolving fund used to purchase property interests, such as agricultural easement, to preserve the agricultural land in the county. That is just framing what the bill is all about. I would now like to, I guess I'll turn it over to Councilmember Friedson since he's the lead sponsor, and then see whether Councilmember Reamer, who's chair of the committee, has any remarks as well. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. This bill is quite a long time coming, and appreciate that we're finally taking it up. We've discussed it. It was discussed previously at a high level. Appreciate Councilmembers Rice and Katz, who are co-sponsors. And it, as noted, would dedicate the business personal property tax revenue received for solar collection systems that are constructed in the agricultural reserve zone and dedicated to the Agricultural Land Preservation Fund. The reason for that is this direct nexus between land in the agricultural reserve that is intended for agriculture, that is used for solar arrays. There has been a concern that has been raised throughout that discussion of whether or not that would impact the agricultural reserve being primarily used for agriculture. And so this would what this would do is create that nexus and allow for our primary agricultural preservation fund to be used so that these issues are not competing, but they're actually complementary, which has always been the goal of what we've all intended to do. I'd also note that the Agricultural Preservation Fund, this is largely funded historically through transfer taxes of farms that become subdivisions, largely. Well, we actually have virtually no more existing farms outside of the agricultural reserve that will become subdivisions. And so the ability to generate revenue to protect and preserve the agriculture of the county, which has long been a critical land use priority, an environmental sustainability priority, and a key part of Montgomery County's high-level policy decisions. This will allow us to do that, to make sure that we're keeping the original intent and mission of the agricultural reserve. Still to this day, one of the most important land use decisions, land preservation decisions that has ever happened, not just in Montgomery County, but anywhere in the country. And it has quite a bit of support from the agriculture community and also a number of other key stakeholders.
Thank you for that. Let's see, Councilmember Chairman Reamer, any comments?
Thank you very much. So much I could say, but I'll try to, be focused here. I would like to just reiterate that the zoning change that we proposed was never a choice between solar and agriculture. It always required agriculture. Really, the choice is between different kinds of agriculture. It's between commodity farming or other types of use of the land. And what we had recommended, which was grazing, solar grazing, sheep, crops beneath the arrays as that becomes more possible in the future, or beekeeping to support agricultural yields. So, there was never a proposal that would have removed agriculture from the land. But I had definitely always envisioned this idea as part of a great grand compromise. And as you know, I was very disappointed in the ultimate decision, which has not yielded a project yet, much to my, much to my dour prediction. And I know that there are a few who have expressed some interest in it, but to use an agricultural metaphor, they're finding that finding the land for it is a needle in a haystack. So the proposal that we have now, I think it's premature. I think that the revenue that we get from this will be known to us, and we could devote, all of it or none of it or double it to agricultural preservation through our normal budget process. And, I always thought it would be a great part of a legislative, compromise to what was really a compromise proposal in the first place, limiting the amount of land to just 2%, of land in the agricultural reserve. But in any event, my concern is that there may be other ways that would be actually more beneficial to supporting agriculture than what the bill prescribes, and that we ought to be more flexible from year to year with the office and figure out other uses that support a variety of goals. So, I think the council has the ability to devote this funding, if we ever get any, however we'd like. And therefore, particularly with the expectation that there won't be much relative to what had been proposed, if any, then, I just don't know that this is needed. So those are my general thoughts, and we'll turn back for our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dwanda. And then Councilmember.
Thank you very much. Good to see everybody, and good afternoon. I think I remember this when it was introduced. It seems like so long ago. So much has happened this year when we were talking about this, but I said then, and I continue to believe that dedicating some of the funding that comes from the creation of solar production and farms in the ag reserve does make sense to preserve the true legacy and intent of the agricultural reserve. And so conceptually, I'm still in the same place. I did send around an amendment to colleagues just before, and my apologies for the late, but a lot going on and was trying to focus on this. But it's very simple. It would just dedicate 50% of any business property tax that comes from the production of a solar farm in the ag reserve to the preservation fund. Racial equity concerns were raised in the racial equity report, saying that if there were at some point, which, this is a fluid process, we're going to continue to. There are several applications that I'm interested in at least one application for a solar farm in the ag reserve in process. We committed when we passed that bill to review in 2 years and have a report. We actually directed a report from planning. The next council will take this up, and hopefully I'll be on it. And I intend to stick to my word, and that we would review how it's going and potentially make changes to open up more land. So I do think that there will be revenue, and it is appropriate to dedicate some of it. The racial equity report for this bill said that if because of the composition of the agricultural reserve and it's predominantly white and as far as farmers and the like, it could have some negative racial equity concerns in that it would be funding for that community, but also that it would take funding from other things in the general fund. And so I think this is a way to commit to the purpose of the bill, but leave some flexibility. One of the public testimony, some of the public testimony and written testimony suggested a fund that, and we discussed this in committee, a fund that would be dedicated to helping farmers of color and to produce and support their work in the Ag Reserve, and that potentially maybe we could use some of this funding for that down the line. So for those reasons, I'd like to move the amendment to reduce the amount to 50%. I don't know if there's a second, but
I'll second it. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And appreciate the bill and the sponsors and the intent of the overall bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just for clarification, Councilmember Joanna, so you're saying to dedicate 50% of the county's share of the business personal property tax collected system located in the agricultural reserve zone, and that. So what would that do in terms of, like you did mention the issue which we had discussed about how we wanted to, and there was a lot of testimony that was saying that there was support to making sure that we found ways to provide capacity and support and access to our communities of color who are very interested in being able to partake in some of the work in the agricultural reserve. So can you elaborate a little bit more about how it is that you feel that this would be structured, given that, property taxes and things like that go into the general fund? Just to clarify how that would actually be then directed to communities of color.
Sure. So to keep it simple, the short answer is it would not, under my proposal. All it would do was it would allow some more of the funding to be reserved for that purpose. I think we would have to come back either in the budget or another bill or proposal that I'd love to work on with colleagues to create some sort of fund to do that, to get more farmers of color to partake and be engaged. And I didn't have somewhere to direct it. If it was something that existed, I would have said direct 50% there and 50% to the preservation. But since it doesn't, I didn't feel comfortable just winging that. So I thought it would be better just to reserve the funding for a later date. Either we can do something budgetarily in the budget process for specific projects that come up, or we could set up a different program over time. So that was the thought.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Giwando, for your suggestion. I'm not supportive of the amendment. Right now, we don't know how much money is going to be collected at all, and a half of nothing is nothing. And so, if we were sitting on a lot of money, or knew that there was a lot of money coming, then that would be one thing to have as part of this discussion. But at this point, we don't know how much money we're going to get. We don't know how much money we're going to need in order to do something. So I believe that your amendment, candidly, is premature. I think that once we know what the numbers are, then that's when this discussion for this amendment should be considered. So I'm not in support of the amendment. But to the overall discussion, and because they're both intertwined, at this year's Montgomery County Agricultural Fair, and I believe Councilmember Friedson, you were there for this luncheon, and maybe Councilmember Giwando, you were as well. I don't, people there again. There's been a few meals in between here, but they announced in public from the podium that there were two farms that were actively, and I believe, and Jeremy Chris is on this call, that they were actively seeking solar farms, solar arrays. And afterwards, I went over to another person that I knew and said, "Where are they?" And he says, "I can't tell you yet, And then another person said to me that they were actively looking, but it wasn't as far along as the other two. So I believe we will have, keeping your fingers crossed, that we will get to where we wanted to be. And so I find that necessary. Bottom line is, I think I'm not supportive of the amendment, but I am supportive of the overall legislation. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Councilor Joanna, for the amendment. I appreciate where this is coming from. I also am not supportive of it. I'm concerned that we are not focusing it in the way that you're intending. The idea that we would not dedicate it, put it into general fund, and then maybe find a way to dedicate it later, I just don't think is the goal here, which is to make sure that we're aligning the interests in this issue with what has been addressed. I can say definitively that we are not going to have more farmers of color, in particular, given the historic challenges that we face, if the cost of farmland goes up. And that is one of the areas, in a modest way, that this is trying to address. And we do have a number of programs that are working on this, including LandLink and some of the other programs. Do we need to do a lot more? Absolutely. And I think we ought to fund them. And I think we have done some work and need to do more work in order to do that, because we do need to have a greater diversity of farmers and of agriculture, like so many other industries. But to forego 50% of this from actually doing what the bill is intending to do, which is to ensure the land stays in agriculture and doesn't become out of reach. We wouldn't have to do preservation if the cost of land wasn't too expensive for most people who want to farm. And one of the reasons why farming is has the challenges that were noted in the racial equity impact statement is because of the historic challenges related to land acquisition and property acquisition, which is about generational wealth, which is about cost of land, and I that is part of what this will help to address, with some of the other tools that we need to be intentional in how we address it. I'll also note that originally, when we set out to look at this issue, I wanted to dedicate the change in the property tax value, the change in the assessments when we go from a commercial use from an agricultural use, which is much more lucrative. We weren't able to do that. That is a tremendous amount of value that will be generated, which will go to the general fund. In addition, the businesses that will be creating the agricultural reserve as a result of this, assuming that they're local businesses, will pay income taxes, or the farmers that have this, if they're leasing it out, will pay additional impact taxes. All of that, which will actually be significantly more than the personal property tax, will go to the general fund to take what is just a small piece of this and split it up further to go to the general fund as well. I don't think is in keeping with the intention of the bill, which is to try in a very modest way, because the personal property tax is a fairly modest amount of money in the scheme of property tax, income tax, and some of the other revenue that is generated. I think we are cutting from what is already a very small piece and putting it towards the general fund, which will not go to agriculture, an area that I think we should be focusing more on, addressing more as we can, and doing the intentional work we need to do to help families of color and communities of color be able to access land acquisition and the ability to farm the land, which I think the amendment, while well intentioned, actually would hurt that effort, not help that effort from my perspective. So appreciate the thought here, but I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
I'm going to turn to Councilmember Joanna next, but just a general question. So, I mean, and obviously I'm trying to digest this in real time because we just got it, but I guess part of my initial concern was this notion that it's just going to, go to the general fund, and we have not been able to literally kind of like identify, right? It's sort of like when we created an NDA from to use the revenues from the cable plan to strengthen our communications office. Like we created the NDA, and then we identified the funding mechanism, and then we began to kind of, strengthen that. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out, that, I'm wondering if the best way to address this issue of racial equity and social justice that was raised in this impact note, perhaps, to me, it seems like it would be more productive to work on a separate proposal, right, that identifies the various ways in which we could create, even if it's, an NDA or something of that nature, in order to specifically facilitate this, this issue that we're trying to address, versus kind of like just reducing it 50%, but then not having a place to kind of park that right now. To me, it feels a little bit almost a little backwards, because I worry where that money is going to end up being. So it's just an observation that I offer. I guess it's more to Mr. Drummer. Like, could there not be a mechanism where instead of doing this in this particular bill, that instead we work on another type of mechanism, either creating an NDA or another bill or something like that, that looks at where a fund like this could actually be created? And who knows, maybe it does say, if this particular effort is going so well, that there's a percentage that comes out of this particular effort. But I'm just trying to figure out whether there's another more direct way that is more comprehensive and really has a bang for your buck versus something that right now is such a small effort. Mr. Drummer.
Well, if you want to do something like that, this wouldn't be the fund to do it with, because there's no money, and there isn't going to be any money probably for 2 years at best. So, but you could certainly do that separately in the budget process, that's coming up all so quickly for next year. You could set up a program and use general fund money for it, or any other type of revenue that you have for something like that. But I don't.
Nothing precludes the council members. Nothing precludes the council members from also coming back, let's say in 2 years, and saying, "Hey, right. So for this fund that we've created, there should be a percentage then that comes from this."
Absolutely.
Solar.
Right. You can come back into this bill and then take a piece of the allocation. It's just, you can't create, I don't think it makes sense to create a program to be funded that there's no money in it.
Right.
It's just, and there won't be for a couple of years. So you can create the program, but you need to find someplace else to fund it.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Joando, then Councilmember Friedson, and then Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's a good conversation. I appreciate it happening organically. Yeah, it's kind of a chicken or egg thing. I mean, I think Councilmember Katz said, nothing for nothing is nothing, right? I think, to paraphrase. But my thought process was that if we reserve, right now there's nothing. And the idea of the bill is to create, when there is something, and we've heard that there are things in the works, it's going to take some time to materialize, that it would go to the Land Preservation Fund, which again I think is a good goal in general. But we, as always, we're trying to deal with multiple competing good goals here in our jobs, and so I rather, my perspective was, I don't want to say we're giving you all of it and then we're going to come back and take it, half of it from you later, as opposed to there's nothing there now. So if we say 50% now, that's we're still in the positive. Life is all about perspective. So we're still getting something to this good goal. And then that leaves us, until things are ready to go, until we develop these programs or seed them in the budget this year, it gives us some time to then direct the other half once they're set up. But so that was the thought process. I understand what you're saying, Councilmember Navarro, about you could do it the other way. It would just mean that, when we create an expectation, say we do have 2, 3, 4 projects and 100% is going to that, then it's going to be seen as we're taking something away, as opposed to now where it's not there, there's nothing there now, and we're just adding. So that was the thought. And to Councilman Friesen's point, I think that, while again, I'm in favor of the goal of land preservation, I just think we can try to do two things with this fund that will hopefully grow over time as we get more, more solar farms in the ag reserve and change the policy there. So not saying we can't do other things, and LandLink's a great program and we should do other things, but I do think that this would be a good use of funds from this fund, because it is one pot, and we always have limited resources, and tying things together, I think, makes sense. But once we tie it, it's hard to untie it. So that was my thought. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Feetson.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation. Yeah, we're all trying to work through this in real time. I do just want to reiterate the assessments in the property taxes, income taxes. I mean, that is where a much higher amount of money would be generated than the personal property tax, the business personal property tax, which is a smaller amount. And so we still do have opportunity, and I hope that this is a fund that grows. But if it is a fund that grows, I'll just note that the other revenues will grow even more. The property tax assessment, the income tax, some of the other areas of opportunity, and certainly there will be more opportunity to then build on that and dedicate it to particular uses. The reality is, as I noted before, we have virtually no subdivisions being built on farms, largely because we made the decision to create the agricultural reserve, and the areas outside the agricultural reserve have been developed largely, Clarksburg being the last major parcel. So we're going to have a broader question that we're going to have to raise, where there's not going to be nearly enough money. The entire revenue source for agricultural land preservation is slowly moving towards nothing. And that is by design, that is by intentionality, but we're going to have to come up with more money to do land preservation, not less. And this is only a small piece to begin that process. Having said that, I think to Chair Navarro's point, I think there's tremendous opportunity for us to look at some of the existing programs we have to build and improve upon them. I mentioned LandLink earlier. I think there are other opportunities that we would look at. I think separately from this bill, I think we ought to work on that. I would commit myself, either working with this entire joint committee or Councilmember Joanda working with you to think through what that might look like and how we could potentially create a program within LandLink, for instance, or an NDA, as was noted by Chair Navarro in the Office of Agriculture, to look at new farmers, new families, to provide more access and to figure out how, particularly those who've been disproportionately left out of agriculture broadly, of land acquisition broadly, could be brought into the fold. I think there's some legal considerations, as we always work through on these things, that we'll have to figure out in terms of how to make that happen. But I think we ought to move forward with this goal and then on a parallel track work on the separate goal, which I certainly would be committed to doing, and I think is something that we definitely ought to move forward on as well.
Chairman Meeman.
Thank you. First, a general point, and then to the specifics of the amendment. I always believed that the proposal would lead to a whole new generation of people coming in to farm in the ag reserve, doing the kind of farm practices that are not commodity farming. And most of the farm in the ag reserve, as we all know, it's wheat, it's soy, it's corn. It's large commodity farming, and there's very little small scale, crops, food that we all think of as food. Most of what is farmed is going into industrial products. It could be animal feed. It could be, actually, it could even be asphalt. Soy goes into asphalt, and that's fine. But that's the way the economy there has evolved. And I still believe that by allowing solar in a small piece of land, a person could buy some land, create enough of a stable revenue base from the piece that goes to the solar, and be more experimental, take a little bit more risk, do some of the kind of farming that isn't necessarily as predictable or as established as the commodity farming. So again, I always, and I still believe that it's a great way to promote farming and to save farming and bring new people into farming. I think the amendment is a wise one because, if we are able to get to a level of solar production, then it would generate significant amount of funding. And I think the council would be wise to have the flexibility from that to devote some of that funding to grants for the land leak program or grants for farmers to try more experimental practices. I mean, there is a lot of opportunity here to have a really big impact with resources that just don't exist today in agriculture. And this, if we had a lot of solar, it would create resources to do that. And I think preservation is an important need. And it's not the only need. I think that sustainability of farming and the constant reinvention of farming, is something also. And I think the amendment allows that, more clearly, because it will reserve some funding to be used. Councilmember Joanna is proposing that we figure out how to fund programs that will support people of color to come into the industry. I think that's a terrific example of the kind of thinking you could implement with resources. So, if there is ever, as a result of other changes in the zoning code, solar coming in at a higher level of, getting implemented at a higher level, then there will be significant revenue. And I think the council would want to be able to allocate that in different ways. And in order to do it at that point, you'd have to take it away. And I think we all know that taking stuff away is something that, we don't like to do. We never do. So proceeding a little bit more in a measured way, 50% for preservation, 50% to be decided, I think would be wise. And that's what the amendment allows. Thanks.
Councilor Murphy-Tun?
Yeah, I thought perhaps we could ask the Office of Agriculture just to briefly mention some of the existing programs to bring in new farmers. I think there's a new farmer program. I mentioned Land Link, but if they could just briefly mention what is happening, and then, as was suggested, and as I think is a really good idea, separately from this, potential opportunities to create initiatives either within that or supplemental to that, I think it might be helpful. If that's okay.
I mean, that would be fine. I'll be honest. I'm still struggling a little bit, and I support the intent, because I do think that we have to be intentional about creating particular funds to not just, because the way that the amendment is written, it's not just for communities of color, it's for different areas, right? I think that is really important. I guess where I'm trying to struggle is procedurally, how do we get to that actual goal? Because if we just go ahead and pass the amendment and pass the bill, we don't have yet a mechanism to whatever, in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or whatever, like to make sure that we're tracking how that money that is going to be allocated, right? I guess that's the part where I'm struggling in terms of procedure right now. It would be different if we had said, we're going to establish some kind of a, program mechanism and whatever we want to call it. And then, as this bill moves through and this program moves through, I mean, we've done that in the past. I mean, I'm not really concerned about saying, hey, in the future, we're going to identify different sources of revenue, including some that we might add ourselves, and we feel strongly that we want to earmark a particular amount from this solar collection to that. I don't see a problem in coming back and doing that. It just feels like right now it's like, okay, we passed this amendment, and then that 50% goes, who knows what it'll go to do. So that's my only issue. So I guess, let's see. I know Councilor Friesen had asked if there could be a description of some of the programs. I mean, I don't have a problem if it's very briefly, and I know Councilor Majondo has had his hand up after that. Is Mr. Chris here? Jeremy, Chris?
Oh, yes, this is Jeremy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Jeremy.
I don't have my camera on because the internet here at the Ag History Farm Park is not quite stable. So we do have, and first of all, I do want to say thank you to the sponsors, Councilmember Friedson, Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Katz for introducing and sponsoring this bill. Anytime we have a chance to talk about the Farmland Preservation Program, it's a very important part of what we do in the Office of Agriculture. Currently, in accordance with Chapter 2B of the County Code, we are supposed to purchase easements on properties that are greater than 50 acres. And that's because the density of the agricultural reserve is one house per every 25 acres. So the thought process is that for a 50-acre property, there would be one house on the property and one remaining development right that we could actually acquire as part of purchasing the easement. And so the policy is that we always want to extinguish and acquire at least one development right with every easement. In light of the racial equity and social justice impact statement for Bill 5-21, Mike Scheffel and I, and he's also on the call, we have proposed as part of the FY 23 to 28 CIP a clause that's written in the code that would allow us to purchase easements on farms a little different than the criteria if the property is going to achieve a public purpose. And so with the public purpose of racial equity and social justice, we believe that we could purchase easements on farms less than 50 acres. So we've discussed this with the Office of Management and Budget. We've discussed this with the county executive, and all those conversations are in flux. But I do want you to know that Mike and I, ever since this bill was introduced in January, we've been thinking about how we could do things differently with our existing farmland preservation. The other thing I wanted to comment on is I wanted to thank the council for supporting in the FY22 operating budget an additional $25,000 that was allocated for our matching grant cost share program that we are very proud of and has helped many new and beginning farmers and many farmers of color, both men and women. And so we are helping many folks now through that program, and all of the progress is posted on our Office of Agriculture's website. And while that program helps people buy the tools necessary to farm the properties that they have, that program currently doesn't help them get access to land in the form of purchasing the land. The Office of Ag partners very extensively with Montgomery Countryside Alliance, Caroline Taylor, and Christina Bostek. Many of our new and beginning farmers are recipients of that program. They have found properties to lease through LandLink. But if we wanted to have a larger discussion on how we could help those people acquire the properties, which would help them to substantiate making investments in the land and really raising the bar on food production, that's something that the Office of Ag would be very interested in doing. So I'll stop there because I think I've just touched on a few of the questions that have come up. And I know that when the executive's capital budget is remitted, we'll have a chance to talk about some of the current thinking of the Office of Agriculture.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that explanation and sharing those thoughts. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. Yes, really appreciate that. Jeremy, we've got to work on that broadband for you. And Mike, good to see you. Yeah, I think so let me say this. There's agreement on let's definitely work, regardless of what happens with the amendment and the bill, let's definitely work on something all together on the programs. I think, Jeremy just underscored that there's a lot of things we could do. This was just intended to give us a little more, another source potentially tap into to do them. But, either way, the good thing is this was productive in that I think we all want to work together to find a way to improve access for women and farmers of color. And to Councilman Reamer's point, other types of innovative farm practice, there's a whole bunch of good things, and revenue is revenue, and we always want more in that pot come reconciliation time. But I think that part I'm eager to work on with colleagues and the sponsors. And again, I'm in favor of the underlying bill and the concept. This was just an effort to address the racial equity concerns, and then just start off in a measured way as we work our way up. But certainly understand and appreciate the conversation, and looking forward to working on that after this, no matter what.
I appreciate it. I think that this is where I'm landing. So I just feel uncomfortable with making a decision right now when we haven't identified the mechanism where that money is going to go to. I would very much love to work with colleagues to work on a separate bill, and maybe that separate bill does identify this particular effort, and maybe it puts a timeline of, in 2 years when we think that some revenue may come, but identify various sources where we can create something that is a lot more targeted. As I hear the descriptions of the programs that we have in place, I think that they've been great, but like everything we are doing lately, it is time to start rethinking, reevaluating some of the programs that we have had in place for a very long time, and see if there are different ways, innovative ways, to be a lot more targeted. Because one of the things also that to me was just so startling through the pandemic was this whole notion of food security, and how do we position this extraordinary treasure that we have, the agricultural reserve, how do we position that and then match that with many folks in our communities who come from agricultural traditions but have not had the access to necessarily participate? This can be a win-win for us, right? So what if we came up with, taking a look at all of the different programs that we have in place? Do we need to perhaps create something a lot more substantive? Do we need to just, get them all together? Do we need to identify some additional sources, earmark some funding, and create something really substantive? Because heaven forbid we're ever in a same situation like we were when the shelves were empty and all this kind of craziness. It would be awesome to at least be able to produce a little bit more and utilize that, again, that talent that we already have. I think that is something that is missing right now, but it has to be a little more comprehensive, I think. And again, I just, in terms of just procedure, I just feel like doing this right now with no place to land. I've seen that movie before where then it gets used for something totally different, and we don't get to where we need to go. But I commit to work with colleagues on putting together something a lot more substantive. And I know Jeremy has talked about some of his conversations. Let's do something that we can support during this budget, so that we can really make a difference versus just having all these different programs and not really being able to do much. So with that, all those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, so that fails, but I hope that on record saying that that's with a caveat that we are going to come and work on something a lot more substantive. Okay, what is next for us?
I think
You can take a full vote.
bill. I mean, it seems like you've certainly discussed all the issues in the packet.
Yeah, it seems like there have been some commitments made, so now everybody is on TV saying these things. All right, so I think with that, we have a bill as introduced. I guess somebody needs to make a motion and then a second.
I'd like to move approval of the bill as introduced.
Second.
Okay, Councilmember Katz is seconded. All those in favor? Raise your hand. That would be Councilmember Friedson, Katz, Joando, and Navarro. All those opposed? Councilmember Reamer. All right. So then we'll take it on to full council.
And you're welcome for
Yes.
speeding through the packet through the amendment process. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
I believe that's it, right?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Good discussion.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Dick Kunkel was